On the night of March 1, 1953, at the Konkazaspa villa on the outskirts of Moscow, Stalin's guards anxiously paced outside his door. Several times they considered pushing the door open, but each time they hesitated and lowered their raised hands. Stalin had been asleep for nearly a day now, but why hadn't he woken up yet? No one responded to their calls. What was happening to Stalin inside the room? Let's go back to February 28, 1953, at the Konkazaspa villa. That night, laughter and conversation mixed with the crisp sound of glasses. The banquet, filled with senior Soviet leaders such as Khrushchev, Beria, Stalin, and Bulganin, lasted from 9 p.m. until dawn. Stalin, sitting at the head of the table, consumed a considerable amount of vodka and appeared in good spirits. His personal doctor had recently conducted a thorough examination and found no major health issues. During the evening, Stalin even teased Khrushchev and asked him to dance. Khrushchev, in the spirit of revolutionary camaraderie, happily obliged and danced, disregarding the dignity of a leader. After 3 rounds of toasts, it was time for the guests to leave. Stalin instructed the guards to see everyone off and then retired to his room, closing the door behind him. Little did he know that this would be a final farewell. On March 1, when the time for Stalin to wake up had passed, the room remained eerily quiet. There were no sounds coming from outside the room either. Normally, Stalin had a bell next to his bed which he would ring in the morning to summon the service staff to bring him water for washing. However, on this day, the bell remained silent. The service staff grew increasingly anxious, but no one dared to knock on the door lightly. Stalin had a rule that no one could enter his room without his summons. Faced with a ruler known for his swift and severe punishments, even the most concerned individuals couldn't grow a second head. At 6:30 p.m., the lights in Stalin's office were turned on, bringing some relief. Everyone awaited the sound of the bell calling for their presence. However, Stalin hadn't eaten lunch or read newspapers and documents. Everything was different that day. At that moment, one brave guard knocked heavily on the door and called out several times, but the room remained silent. The situation was becoming increasingly suspicious. It wasn't until 11 p.m., when the on-duty staff member, Starostin Tukokov, and the restaurant server, Budasova, conferred, that they decided Starostin Tukokov would go and deliver the mail, providing a plausible excuse in case of reprimand. As Starostin Tukokov passed through several rooms, he casually turned on the lights. However, when he turned on the light in the small dining room, he was shocked. He saw Stalin lying on the floor, dressed in pajamas and a shirt, struggling to raise his hand and beckon Starostin Tukokov closer. But no words escaped Stalin's lips. Fear and pleading were evident in his eyes. On the table, there was an open bottle of Borhomi mineral water, and on the floor lay a torn Truth newspaper and a shattered pocket watch. The watch's hands pointed to 6:10. At 3 a.m., Beria arrived. The smell of alcohol emanated from him, yet he didn't immediately call for a doctor. Instead, he shouted at the guards and staff, "What's the fuss? Can't you see Comrade Stalin is sleeping? Go back and don't disturb the leader's sleep." It wasn't until around 9 a.m. on March 2 that the doctors finally arrived after a group of high-ranking officials gathered. By that time, 8 hours had passed since Stalin was first found collapsed. The doctors began their attempts to resuscitate him. On March 5, 1953, at 9:50 a.m., Joseph Stalin, the paramount leader of the Soviet Union, closed his eyes forever. His condition in the final moments was exceptionally horrifying. Just before his death, Stalin suddenly opened his eyes and scanned everyone standing around him. It was a terrifying gaze that swept across all the individuals present. Then, he made an incomprehensible and strange gesture. He raised his left hand, whether pointing upward or indicating something else is unclear. Blood flowed from his mouth, and Stalin's heart stopped. Several medical personnel rushed to perform artificial respiration. After more than 10 minutes, Beria yelled, "It's over. It's over. It's finally over." On March 5, 1953, at 9:50 a.m., Stalin departed from this world. Following his death, there were various speculations about the cause. Subsequently, members of his personal medical team met with mysterious deaths or were arrested, adding an air of mystery to the circumstances surrounding his demise. Who was responsible, And why did they take such a high-risk step to assassinate Stalin? Throughout history, rulers have been accompanied by the presence of murder. For political reasons, Stalin also had numerous body doubles. A declassified Soviet document from 1996 reveals that the commonly seen portrait of Stalin in history books was actually taken by his body double, Felix Dodov. Dodov underwent various transformations to resemble Stalin, such as styling his hair and beard and aging his appearance. First, his hair and beard were meticulously crafted, followed by making Dodov look older. Brown foundation was applied to his face and neck to create a dark complexion. Then, artificial smallpox scars were created to mimic Stalin's facial marks. Additionally, Dodov had to gain weight through excessive eating to match Stalin's physique. When both Stalins appeared together in front of people, it was a shocking sight. They looked so alike that even the staff members who had been constantly by Stalin's side could hardly distinguish between them. Just imagine, if someone really wanted to assassinate Stalin. Wouldn't they risk mistaking the real one for the double? There is a saying in the investment world that is often discussed: high risk, high reward. Looking back at the political scene at that time, we can identify several ambitious successors. Lavrent Beria and Nikita Khrushchev were the most prominent among them. Let's start with Beria. Like Stalin, Beria was from Georgia and enjoyed Stalin's trust. From the end of World War II until Stalin's death, he was essentially the second most powerful person in the Soviet Union, overseeing the state's political security apparatus and the People's Police Force. These two departments had the authority to investigate anyone on Soviet soil, apart from Stalin himself. So why would Beria want to assassinate Stalin? The appearance of Beria's diary seems to unveil the mystery. Before Stalin's passing, although Beria had gained significant power, he grew increasingly frustrated with Stalin. Being close to the tiger but fearing its pounce, even with the camaraderie of being fellow Georgians and the revolutionary spirit, Beria sensed a revolutionary opportunity. As the main executor of Stalin's purges, Beria was well aware of the consequences. Trotsky, Bukharin, and Rykov, who were all revolutionary comrades of Stalin, had faced varying degrees of repression. Beria decided to strike first. He introduced slow-acting poison into Stalin's mineral water, causing him to gradually deteriorate and raising further suspicions. Anatoly Funtikhanov had firmly asserted in 1975 that Beria was the mastermind behind the plot. Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov recorded in his memoirs that Beria told him, "I took care of Stalin." When Khrushchev heard the rumors, he also emphasized that Beria couldn't hide his joy during Stalin's illness. However, as for the diary attributed to Beria, whether it truly existed and whether Beria himself authored it, we cannot know. In my opinion, it is unlikely that any national leader would be so careless. Let's talk about Nikita Khrushchev and his motive for the crime. Before Stalin's death, Khrushchev had been patiently waiting and proclaiming that Stalin was like his own biological father in order to win Stalin's appreciation and trust. As a result, Khrushchev had been groomed as the successor to the highest positions in the party and the country during the post-Stalin era. At this point, you may be even more confused. What event caused such a dramatic change in Khrushchev's attitude? This brings us to one person, Leonid Khrushchev, who is Nikita Khrushchev's son. Due to Nikita Khrushchev's busy schedule, he did not provide strict discipline for his son. Leonid, who sought excitement, ended up associating with bandits. During a high-level Soviet gala, the intoxicated Leonid Khrushchev got into a dispute with a military officer and shot him. When Stalin heard the news, he immediately decided to execute Leonid Khrushchev. At that time, Khrushchev, who was the first secretary of the Ukrainian Communist Party, knelt down and pleaded with Stalin. Stalin relented, but during World War II, Leonid Khrushchev mysteriously went missing during a flying battle. It was initially believed that he had made a heroic sacrifice, and the media highly praised Leonid Khrushchev. However, it was later discovered that Leonid Khrushchev was not missing but had been captured by the German army. The German army used this to publicize Leonid Khrushchev's act of surrender in order to undermine the morale of the Soviet Red Army. When Stalin learned of this, he was furious and ordered his agents to bring back Leonid Khrushchev at any cost. After various twists and turns, Leonid Khrushchev was rescued, but Stalin showed no mercy. Following military court procedures, he immediately executed Leonid Khrushchev on the spot. Khrushchev could only watch helplessly as his own son fell under the cold barrel of a gun. There were many rumors circulating in the Soviet newspapers and publications at that time, but as for the truth, it has been decades since the events occurred, and we have no way to verify them. After Stalin's death, a new surprise arose in the Soviet Union. In the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union in 1956, the Soviet government led by Khrushchev launched a wave of complete negation of Stalin. At this astonishing conference, Khrushchev delivered a secret report on the cult of personality and its consequences, exposing the phenomenon of personal worship of Stalin and rectifying the false cases caused by the expansion of the purge. It officially and openly launched what is commonly known as the de-Stalinization movement. The Stalin works were confiscated, many of his letters and telegrams were burned, and most of his articles and drafts disappeared. Thousands of cities, factories, streets, and collective farms named after Stalin in the Soviet Union were renamed. Beside the Volga-Don Canal, the enormous bronze statue of Stalin was toppled, and people swarmed to strike the face of the Stalin statue. Stalin, like Saddam, suffered the same fate of humiliation. A few days later, the body of Stalin was taken out of Red Square's Lenin Mausoleum and cremated. It was then reburied behind the Lenin Mausoleum, under the foot of the Kremlin wall, in a burial place reserved for leaders of the Soviet Communist Party. This meant that Stalin could not enjoy the status of the supreme leader like Lenin, but only the treatment given to other leaders of the Soviet Communist Party. Overnight, Stalin went from being a revered saint to a despised demon by the people of the Soviet Union. The people lost their faith overnight, and the spiritual system established by Stalin collapsed. Evaluating Stalin no longer mattered. It was time to establish dominance, but ruling immediately was impossible. Stalin was a great man.